Hello and welcome back to Chitheads. My name is Khalid and I'm one of the learning navigators at Embodied Philosophy. We have a resonant episode today with Lucy Crisfield, who is a speaker at the World Yoga Festival, a plenary speaker at the British Wheel of Yoga Festival, and the founder of Original Wisdom, through which she shares the inner teachings of mantra and yoga philosophy with sound, meditation, and scholarly precision. Lucy has just finished writing a book with the same title as her signature course, The Sounds of Sanskrit, the Language of Yoga. Lucy studied the violin and piano at the Royal College of Music from the age of 11, and after receiving a first-class honors degree in mathematics and music, she left London to travel solo through 20 countries over 5 years in her quest for a deeper understanding of life. Lucy now lives in the southwest of England with her partner and 2 children, where she offers unique classes which share the teachings and sounds of yoga tradition to illumine the intellect and connect us to the creative wisdom of the self. In this episode, Lucy and Jacob discuss the differences between the academic and vibratory approaches to Sanskrit, the metaphysical identity of sound, as well as the philosophy of sound within the modern yoga world. We hope you enjoy.
Yeah, when I was reading your book, one of the things that I just feel I have as yet to feel connected to. This time around I've been here for just over 2 years, and previously I was in Oxford and I wasn't in London. But the story of kind of your formation and your the evolution of your study and adventure with Sanskrit. It was just beautiful to read about these incredible teachers in London.
Yeah.
You kind of you paint this really vibrant picture of a really kind of spiritually rich city, if you know where to find it. But of course, and I kept thinking to myself, gosh, I need to find these teachers, and then sadly, each one of them has passed away. So maybe you'll be able to tell me who some of their living lineage holders are at some point. But tell us a little bit about that. Like, I want to know about these incredible teachers who you had the great fortune of learning from. How did they really shape your understanding of Sanskrit, and how did they orient you in this incredible kind of vibratory adventure that you're in?
Yeah, well, I think the first, real, shining beacon, so to speak, was called Dr. Shastri. And I'd enrolled in the SOAS, School of Oriental African, is that right? African Science? No, I don't know what it is. Anyway,
Yeah.
SOAS,
SOAS, yeah.
to do their evening Sanskrit course. And so I went to a talk, and there was Dr. Shastri was giving a talk there. And something about the shape of his head, like just this incredible like forehead and kind of angle to his head, and these very, very strong, vibrant eyes and vibrant heart, like kind of I always, when I think of him, I think of this kind of fire, like a kind of bright burning fire. And what struck me immediately was his brilliant command of the English language. I mean, it was like kind of being with a Stephen Fry, but even better almost, just this incredible flexibility and fluidity, and kind of catching you out in the sentences that you say, and kind of showing you how what you say is not ever quite what you mean, because it's almost impossible to be really, really close in the English language, just because our structure doesn't allow it. So of course, when you're a master of Sanskrit, which is the grandmother of English, it means that your understanding of English is just incredible. And so I was so struck by this. And I could tell also that he was Indian, and so assumed he lived there, and said, we knocked him after, like, can I come and meet you once before you go back to India? He's like, well, I live in Hounslow half the year, which was just literally 10 minutes from where I was living in Twickenham, 6 months of the year. And I was like, oh, wow. And then he spent the other 6 months of the year living in a Sanskrit speaking village, well, that's where he was from, sorry, in kind of near north of Mumbai, like about, I don't know, 5-6 hours north of Mumbai. I still haven't managed to visit it. So I went one-on-one. I went to see him. I think I had 5 years with him, and I would go every week, and with a list. I'm a good question writer with my list of like 20, 30 answer kind of 3 or 4 of them. We just sit on the floor on his, nothing. You walk in his room and there was nothing in it. It's just completely empty. I think there was just like a statue and a picture of one of the gods somewhere, and it just sits straight on the floor, no cushion, no, just that kind of that Indian vibe, but there in Hounslow, in London. And so he'd sit, and his wife would bring in really, really, really sugary tea, which was like try and sip, try and kind of gulp down to chai. And so he was really, really formative in kind of taking my understanding beyond what I'd initially learned with the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandarin. So the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandarin, they're based in Chennai, is where I'd done my first exploration into the Vedic chanting and the Sanskrit. And I just wanted to know more, and he was kind of my first step into broadening beyond what that lineage had shown me. So before I move on to Peter, any questions or anything about that?
Oh yeah, so and it was interesting about Dr. Shastri because when I first saw that name, I looked him up, I Googled him, and actually the first thing that came up was my advisor at Oxford giving the Dr. Shastri lecture on like 2021. So I just thought it was this beautiful serendipitous connection that I would have looked it up and my own teacher would have come up. But also that they obviously, that Dr. Shastri is so well respected that, he was given a lecture by Devakar, who's currently the professor of Eastern religions and ethics at Oxford, I guess. So I thought that was really beautiful. Just to sorry.
I know that Dr. Shastri had a lot of influence, a lot of connection in Oxford, in the Oxford Centre, and the School of Economic Sciences. So all the kind of main hubs of Sanskrit in England, I believe Dr. Shastri was definitely an advisory element of that at some point in his time, because I think he lived in England most 50% of the time for good years, like a long time. So
so would you say that because your approach to Sanskrit is quite rooted in kind of the traditional sonic theology in a way, so and a lot of times when you find Sanskrit academically or within academic departments, it's somewhat stripped out. So was Dr. Shastri kind of in the middle? Did you experience that as not being this sort of like stripped down academic version of Sanskrit, but still kind of maintaining the attention to the vibratory approach?
Yeah, absolutely. Because when I was with SOAS, that was definitely the stripped down, academic approach. And with the KYM, the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandarin, it was just the vibratory, and he did really branch over those two aspects, and he could, philosophically rich, grammatically rich, and etymologically rich. I since have gone on to study Panini with Dr. Stephen Thompson. I think he had a basic grasp of Panini. So yeah, he was able to really go around in the whole area, the whole sphere that I was interested in, because I definitely it's both for me. It's not just the vibratory, it's absolutely the way I see the academia is, it can't be separated from the deep philosophical richness that is held within it. But you really do need to spend a little bit of time kind of sitting in the structure. What is the container? What is the structure of this language? And to do that, it can feel like you have to access that slightly more thinking part of the mind. But as you do that, of course, all it does is deepen those times when you're sitting in the vibratory element of the soundscape as well.
So then how did Peter, you're the next teacher that you encountered, how did he sort of expand your understanding? Because it seems like he had a particularly profound impact on you.
Yeah, Peter Harrison. Yeah, just even saying the name, I got the kind of chills. So yeah, there was actually the week I was leaving London, you know, having spent 30 years of my life
Of
in
course.
London. Um, and I was this particular line of inquiry had been intriguing me for a long time, which is to do with swara. So the udatta, what is udatta and udatta swarita, which some people describe as pitch. Dr. Shastri described as the positions within the mouth, but different people, I was getting conflicting ideas from different people, and I still wasn't kind of like, hadn't felt it in my system exactly what it was. So anyway, searching on the internet, and an article came up, and the article was so different to anything I'd read before about, I don't think it was necessarily about something to do with Sanskrit. And it was this website, it just said Peter. There was no information about where he lived. It was a .com, so he could have been in the US, or it didn't necessarily say he's in England. And it said, any questions, contact Vanessa, who was his student. So I sent my question about this swara to Vanessa, and the reply I got back from Peter just went beyond all the kind of academic different views and understandings that I had received from other teachers, and it just went straight to the universal resonance of sound, without getting into the particularities of, because I'd have to explain a bit. It's giving you the feeling of it. And I was so kind of surprised. I just didn't know what to reply. I just knew I had to meet him, so I replied and said, you know, do you live in London? Could we have a session? And he replied and he said, I don't do sessions. As Gurdjieff said, when you take on a student, you take them on in their entirety. I'm only interested in a meeting of hearts. But I know nothing. Why don't you go see Sylvain McIntosh, someone who wrote a book? You know, I have nothing to tell you. Go see someone else. I kind of like, you know, these typical stories of like a guru, right? Which
Yeah,
you read in books,
exactly.
right?
Like the
Which is
right kind of guru, though.
yeah, in London. They're always in India, right? Not in London with an
Yeah.
English guy who's never been to India, as it turned out. And of
Hmm.
course, I replied like, no, I really would like to meet you, please. And we went back a few times, and eventually said, Lucy, you are insistent. Okay, I'll speak on the phone next week or whatever. So we spoke on the phone. I remember, I think it was like 2 days before I left London. And I was kind of walking around outside my house, and as soon as I heard his voice, it was like, who is this? What is this person? What is this person? And he said, okay, at the end of that conversation, come and see me in Turnpike Lane. So he lives in a very, very, very busy area in Turnpike Lane. There was kind of like a kind of mad person who lived next to him. You could hear these kind of like wails through the wall. And I arrived. I didn't know what to bring. I just bought a pineapple because I didn't kind of know what to do. And again, typical kind of teacher Indian guru story. I write a knock at the door. He just opens the door, and I was like 1 minute late because I didn't want to be totally on time. He just opened the door. You're late. I was like, oh. And just walking. I'm like, I've got this pineapple for you, and he's like, okay, put it there. And then we sit down in this. Again, it's kind of quite well. It wasn't like Dr. Shastri's room, but it was like this big room, just a chair in the middle of the room. And he said, sit down. And I sat down. He's like, so what do you want? I'm like, so I come start trying to think of a question, right, about the Yoga Sutra or the Upanishad, and I come out with some question, and he says, I'm not an information bureau. I know nothing. What do you really want to know? And then I'm like, you know, and then I don't know, come out with something else, and then there's a silence, and he just kind of fixes me with his eyes, and he's like, Lucy, what do you really want to know? And it's like, okay. And then you know, and then my voice changed because he could hear the voice, right? A voice that's kind of like where my voice is now is a little bit more. It's just kind of in the mind a little, and it's like he was already, I think, 76 when I met him or something. I don't have time to talk about information. It's like, let's get to the core of things right from the beginning. And then I can't remember exactly what my question was. It was something like, well, who am I? You know, who am I? And then it was the tone of the voice.
No, just, you know, a really light one to begin.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's kind of it. We're going to cut right to the core. So that's what this is all about, right? And he's like, okay, now we can begin. And then I was with him for like 4 hours that day. So no notes. no writing. It's like, you can't listen and make notes, you just listen. And I just had my baby, was, I don't know, 6, maybe 8, 7 months or something, but I just kind of knew there was almost nothing more important than seeing Peter as often as I could, because, you know, as soon as I met him, I could sense his age as well. And I then traveled down from Stroud, so 2.5, 3 hours, gave my baby to my mother, and it was always a 4-hour session as often as I could, sometimes every other week, but then it lessened when the other baby came, and then I got involved. He had a group, so then I joined the group, and I went on a few retreats together. And so what Peter gave was, I mean, he was a master of sound, and that was what I was looking for, a true master of sound. And I'd already studied the Yoga Sutra and the Upanishad with the KYM, with Kaustubh, with Desikachar, you know, Kaustubh before he the whole thing, if anyone knows about that. But anyway, previous to that, I was very involved with him, and I'd studied with Dr. Shastri, and also a little bit with Dr. Stephen Thompson. And then when it came to Peter, it was like, here we're finally getting to the cherry on top. You know, we're finally getting to, it's nothing about all these conflicting different intellectual ideas about what things are. It's about the sound. It's about the resonance. And if we, it's just about tuning our ear to hear. And in fact, we all have this capacity. It's an innate within everyone. But firstly, we often don't trust it because we're not used to trusting and knowing that isn't that kind of like mathematical, oh, I understand 2 + 2 is 4. That's not the knowing we're looking for, right? And that's what we tend to do as Westerners, because we come from that kind of structure of, we've made a connection in our mind about the feeling in our body and what it is to know something. And so if we don't have that feeling, we don't think we know something. But what Peter showed me was that that feeling that we have is actually a restriction, a block to allowing the actual knowing that these great works bring forth within us. And it is impossible to access that without the sound, because it's brought through the sound. So the very idea, which I already knew about, trying to look at the Yoga Sutra in a translation, it's just kind of an interesting exercise. But obviously, if we're going to access it through the sound, first of all, we need to know what the right sounds are. And then once we've kind of heard those right sounds and learned how to kind of feel them, there's a kind of dropping of a turning from making the sound and looking for answers, like, what does this mean as I make this sound, to kind of that kind of backward step they talk about in Zen of just noticing what's already there in the sound, hearing what's already in the sound. And so I suppose now what I share is a combination of kind of bringing people through meditation into that kind of state of hearing, of listening, but also entering those other areas of the Enneagram. So Peter talks a lot about the natural Enneagram, which is present within the Veda and the Yoga Sutra. It's just kind of a natural expression of the way things unfold, right? These 9 steps around a circle. So which step? So Vyakarana, which is the grammar, is at number 4. So we step in at number 4, and we deepen into the philosophical richness of the structure of the language. We step in at number 1, which is Shiksha, which is the pronunciation. Like, how do we get really clear about the pronunciation? And Chandas, number 2, the rhythm. What is the rhythm of these mantras that we are sounding? And as we step in these different parts of the circle, so the whole circle starts to speak to us. The whole Veda, which all of this comes from, the wisdom of the Veda, kind of comes forth in this resonant sound that we are now attuned to hear. And it just takes a few little or just some steps to hear it, much like a musician. can hear very easily, oh, there's chord 1, chord 5, chord 4, you know, when they hear a pop song, it's like, well, that's just chord 4, 5, 1. It's very simple. But we don't hear that until we've been shown it. And once we've done a few music theory, like this is what chord 5 to chord 1 sounds like, you're like, oh, okay. And then you're like, oh, okay, oh, and that's just what that piece is, just now it's gone to chord 6, and that's a slightly minor chord, and that's how they're creating that atmosphere of kind of feeling slightly sentimental. Or so it's the same with music, you know, or art. You if you don't know anything about art, you look at a picture, you know, that's nice. But if someone shows you, well, if you do this line here, it brings the perspective this way, and you learn how to see art, right? I personally have not been shown that, but I have been shown how to hear music. I haven't had my background in classical music, piano and violin, so in a way it was quite easy to kind of bring that already sensitivity to the soundscape into the Sanskrit. Yeah.
Oh, I want to pause on that because I really like this. So you learn how to see art. I love this analogy because it also kind of resonates with what I see in the work of Abhinavagupta, right? Is that there's this sort of process of cultivation. There's this process of sort of almost like a form of aesthetic refinement that happens. So, you know, in the process of kind of cultivating oneself spiritually. And do you then, so do you see it then as sort of like development of a certain faculty that is latent? To be able to hear the Veda is something that we all have the capacity to do, but as you're describing it in terms of learning how to see art or learning how to hear music based on theory, that this is a faculty. It's not something kind of, in other words, it's not something utterly transcendent. There's something actually quite pragmatic and available about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think that's what people often resist, right? As they think of it as this kind of otherworldly thing, when in fact it's just a fact. It's like a muscle we haven't developed.
Absolutely, absolutely. And when I so you know, when I work with people as an intro thing on yoga teacher trainings or something, I'll show this. We'll sound the 5 basic vowel sounds, and then I'll ask them, well, which one's which element: earth, water, fire, and space. So they're sounding, and they're like, oh my god, I don't know. I'm like, well, just try. We're going to sound them. We'll sound the 5 vowels a few times, and then it's like, okay, which one's water, which one's earth? And then often there will be quite a few people who's like, well, that sound was just water, I just knew that was water. And it's like, right, you knew that, right? It's in your being. And then they're like, wow, I don't know how I knew that. And it's like, no, but that's the beginning. If we can hear the elements within the vowels and trust that, then we can hear the elements within the consonants. And then so there's kind of, these are the kind of latent steps of reawakening our ability to hear, to hear resonance. And what's the ultimate resonance? The ultimate resonance is ourselves, the self. What is self? And the self is this expression of sound.
So this is such a different understanding of sound, you know, just to bring it back to kind of our own cultural conditioning. Can you talk a little bit about sort of what are the obstacles from that perspective that we are dealing with? Like, you know, when we come into a room and, you know, from some perspective, like music is sort of the most divine thing there is, and it's sort of right in front of our face. And yet, in terms of its kind of reflection of that, and yet we've kind of categorized it as entertainment, right? It's sort of, it's sort of bracketed off as this thing that we can appreciate from some sort of, you know, aesthetic distance, but it doesn't really have anything profound to say, which seems to me to kind of reflect a little bit of the cultural way in which we ignore something that's right in front of our face. So how do you kind of get your students around this sort of, let's call it a Western obstacle that isn't ready to kind of understand this kind of metaphysical identity of sound?
Yeah, well, I think I think within your question also is the question of, you know, what is the difference between music and mantra, right? I've written a post at some point saying, you know, mantra is not music. Because we'll have and think people think mantras, and you can take some Sanskrit words and say them completely within your current Sanskrit, within your American or English um, sound forms, and all you're doing is rearranging the consonants and vowels into a different order, and you're saying tat savitur completely with the t's in the wrong place and the o in the wrong
Was that
place.
your American accent?
All American, mostly American, aren't they? Well, as English as well,
Tat
but
savitur vareniam.
Rainyam Bhargo, I mean, not Bhargo, Bargo Deva Siddhimahi. So they're saying this, right? And there's no observation of the vowel sound. There's no observation not only of the consonants, but also the vowels, but also the rhythm, the inherent rhythm of what is the Gayatri. The Gayatri, what does Gayatri mean? Gayatri means the rhythm of 3 times 8 syllables. So if you change the syllabic rhythm, you are no longer having any interaction with the Gayatri. So not only are you're putting the consonants and the vowels, or you're not leaving your soundscape, you're then adding a Western 1-4-5 harmony to it, or 5-6 harmony, and calling it a mantra. But it's not. It's music. What is mantra? Mantra comes from the root mantra, and it does not mean protecting the mind. Mantra. That's completely incorrect. The dhatu is mantra, which means in secret uttering all around. What is a mantra? Mantra is the agent of that which secretly mutters all around, right? And if someone says to you, something is being secretly uttered all around, what do? What's the kind of gesture that you make, right? You listen, right? Like, what's the secret? You're kind of like, you're listening. You're not putting yourself tat savvy. You're not like, it's not me doing the Gayatri. It's like I'm listening for the rhythm, for the sound of the river coming. That's what chandas, the movement. I'm listening for the sound, the natural sound of the universe that is already present. And it's very, very hard to hear that when we, first of all, staying within the system that we were born, that our vernacular language that we're born into, comes from the Latin vena, slave. The vernacular literally means the slave that is tied to the hearth. So when we're born, we have to be tied to a hearth to survive, right? We need to know how to communicate so we can get our food and eventually that structure into which we've been born and the sounds keep us as a slave to all our thoughts, all our repetitive, thoughts of none of which are true, all in our language. Those which know more than one language have a great blessing because they experience how their whole system, their whole body, they feel different when they sound a different language, when they speak a different language. Now, what is it about Sanskrit? And I don't even know I don't think I'm answering your question, but I'm just going to carry on with this theme for now.
No, you are. It's beautiful. Keep going.
Okay, good. So if I stay in English, tad savitur, I haven't gone beyond that which is tying me as a slave to the hearth. It's kind of like an asana, like when we do our yoga, like if we do our trikonasana, just this kind of slight movement, we haven't surrendered to the asana, right? So asya is the position in the mouth. So what is mantra? Mantra is the most subtle of all the spiritual paths of inquiry. What does it mean to be subtle? It means it is subtle. It means it's not going to be tat savitur varanium with some tabla and a thing. I'm not saying that doesn't do something, that opens the heart, and as kind of repressed Westerners, singing in a group of people with music is always a wonderful thing to do. You feel connected to the people around you. But it's not mantra. It's a fraction of the power of the truth of mantra. And that fraction is found when we get very, very still, very quiet. We start really feeling, so it's not E, it's ooh, ooh. It's not ooh, it's ooh, so we're feeling all of the vowels and consonants. We're feeling the rhythm. As we feel this, we're kind of turning into, what is this? What is the Gayatri? What is the magic of the Gayatri? Can I hear it? And as we as I teach in Ekashruti, which is just one tone, we observe the svara, but the svara are positions within the mouth that don't affect the pitch. So we're working with the energy within the mouth. And when we're working with the energy in the mouth, with the ekashruti, with the one pitch, you really are sounding incantations in your mouth, right? You're the dance of the universe is like fireworks in your mouth. And it becomes very still, very almost, I want to use the word private, but it's like the only person who's going to realize who I am is me. So it's down, ultimately down to me and my mouth and my sound and me hearing who I really am. And of course, group work is also amazing and has tons of, benefits to it. But the real essence of mantra is found quietly by yourself, listening to the incredible power and resonance that exists in our very own mouth and heart.
How beautifully articulated, Lucy. That's so beautiful. We'll have to extract that as a little little video short teaching for you. So, as you're speaking, I'm thinking, how kind of important this perspective is, and how really rare it is in a lot of ways, how difficult to find, at least in my experience. It's harder to find teachers who are teaching from this place. And we spent a little bit of time talking about kind of the academic way and the way in which it is not interested largely in it's really kind of, I mean, in my experience, the teaching of Sanskrit, especially at Oxford, is very mapped, or rather modeled, on this kind of classic philological approach, right, which does, kind of tries to bracket out the vibratory stuff because it's essentially religious and they want to be secular in their own way. Or they think it's religious. That's how they see it. But then at the same time, so we have that on the one hand, and then the other extreme is sort of the modern yoga world, where this teaching, or this perspective of the philosophy of sound is generally missing. So I'm curious what your experience has been in kind of the modern yoga world, and do you see it as a sad thing that much of postural yoga sort of is anesthetized of this truth, or do you have a kind of, how do you sort of relate to that, and how do you enter into that environment when you're teaching, knowing that this is going to be quite alien to many yoga practitioners?
Yeah, good question. There's a few streams coming to me. Most people who come to, so I have two ways of teaching. So in fact, mostly everything I do is people come to me, but occasionally, and more in the past, I used to go to yoga teacher training. They'd invite me to do their 2-day philosophy thing, right? So those people haven't chosen me. They're just doing a teacher training, and then I turn up, right? And they're like, what the fuck this happened? Because I cannot teach surface. I just can't do it. And sometimes people said, you can't go to it. It's like I can. It's just clear. It's on my thing now. I will only go to the absolute deepest level right from the beginning. That's all I can do. So I used to teach at, there's a few places I taught where they in their 20s they've signed up to yoga clearly because they're in the spandex, kind of like that kind of vibe, and but everyone. And I taught it, about 5 years ago. I've taught a couple of really tough ones, 40 in the room, 43 in the room, just, they're all on the phones eating, and you've got all in their 20s, just never done anything like this, right? And you've got a harness, and every time it's happened, magic, absolute magic. And the toughest group, it took 2 days. Most groups it takes half a day, but the toughest group, it took 2 days, and by that second day, they're all listening for the first time. And why? Nothing to do with me. It's because of the sound. Because you cannot teach that group just by talking, right? You've got to slowly, you do the call and response, then the bit of talk, and they're like what the hell just happened? I just meditated for the first time in my life. For the first time in my life, my mind was still like, and then you have the feedback, and then you do a bit of teaching, and you do a bit more sound. And the sound, the Sanskrit sound, when you sound it as it is supposed to be sounded, even when you sound it when it's how it's not supposed to be sounded, it's powerful, right? Even when you just hear it completely incorrectly pronounced with a guitar, it does something. So just imagine what it's like when you actually sound it right. It's like you get right down to that core. And that, it's amazing to see. They just didn't even know that this could exist. And they'll all say, this is the best part of the teach training. Such a privilege, so grateful that you could be here. And then the people who but I do less of this now just because I'm doing more of I don't have so much time. So the people who come to me, who sign up to my thing, they usually have done 20 years of yoga practicing, of training and whatever, and they'll come to me and I'll show them how to sound like the Bija mantra for the first time. So they've all studied the Bija mantra like for 10 years. They've taught it for 5 years, and then I show them how completely wrong everything they've ever been shown is. And people are in shock, they're like, oh my God, like kind of hysterical laughing, like shocked, like, what am I going to do? Like everything I've been teaching has to be changed. And it's like initially there's a kind of like little hurdle for them of like, wow, I've got to really relook at everything. But also, wow, thank God I've found someone who's actually for the first ever time told me what these sounds are. Because people, and especially with sound, like, with the transmigration, whatever the word is, from the east to the west, we've had the asanas come over. The sound has really got lost, and the Sanskrit. A few Western practitioners learned a few words. They for example, someone learned the word manas, and then they thought, oh, manas is mind, therefore that man in mantra, mind, right? You see, so then everyone says mantra is protecting the mind. No one actually checks what the dhatu is. Man doesn't even mean mind. It means sambodhane, in awakening. So if man was being treated as a dhatu, it has nothing to do with the mind, and it's actually mantra. So many people, layers upon layers upon layers of people now have never checked the dhatus. No one's checked the roots. No one's checked the thing. And so we've got not only misinformation on all the basic words, but also complete lack of understanding of the actual resonance or sound or the depth of it. So yes, there is I think I wrote, I think I didn't get that. A few people were a bit ruffled. That was the only and last time I ever posted on the Yoga Teachers England page, and it was a post called Yoga Teachers Teacher Trainees Have Got It Wrong. A mantra revolution is on the way, right? And I was like, okay, this is not the place to be, and I've posted once in the last 6 months on Instagram, like this kind of teaching, it's not for Instagram and Facebook. This is for actual face-to-face deep work, and whenever I have the chance to be with a group of people, without a doubt, everyone will feel it. It's never not happened. Every group I've ever taught have ended that group, and I can feel it. Like they're all like, gosh, I had no idea. And so, and that's been a teaching for me. I was just going to say that's been a teaching, because obviously when you first start teaching, you're like, and so now that you get the nerves, I still get nervous before teaching, but also I just know because it's something far beyond anything to do with me. Like if I just sound those sounds and encourage people to sound those sounds, all the teaching is done for me. It's nothing to do with me.
I mean, there is sort of a yearning, I think, for a lot, a sense of meaningfulness. Even though in your book, the meaning is beyond meaning, as you point out at one point, like, or that it's sort of below the threshold of meaning in some deep way, right? Because it's sort of the condition of all meaning. But nevertheless, I think that so many people as they come into yoga, there's a lot of confusion about kind of the historical and philosophical underpinnings, and there's a lot of ways in which I think the what is sort of passing as kind of yoga philosophy today or yoga history is actually kind of more of a scholarly enterprise. Like
Yeah,
the scholars have replaced the sort of
yeah,
devotional teachers and gurus in a lot of ways in these teacher trainings, and it's very surface. It's very stula, right? It's very
yeah,
gross level understanding, and it's not
yeah,
actually
yeah,
offering the vibratory practice because they don't know that. They weren't trained in that. They were only
exactly.
trained in studying the kind of surface
Yeah,
intellectual history of this stuff.
yeah, yeah. And it's appealing because that's how we are conditioned to feel like we know something, right? It's like I want to be a yoga teacher, so I need to feel like I know what yoga is. So obviously doing kind of studying in that way, we feel is bringing us closer to it, and it does bring us some understanding, and it brings many thoughts, and of course as I say in my piece, it's like I have also learned many things that way. It's not to say
Yeah.
that way is completely wrong, but it has to be with the other, both ways. And that other kind of more just deep inquiry through the vibration, as you say, is definitely missing. Yeah.
Hmm. I want to ask two questions. One about the vibration that you've been talking about, and another about grammar. And the question about vibration is based on something that I've observed comes up a lot for students because when they hear, people want to do it right, right? There's a lot of students that they care about it, whether it's because of concerns about appropriating things incorrectly, or concerns about vibrating incorrectly, and then a thunderbolt from God is going to come down and strike me dead, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
like if you get this mantra wrong, you have 7 years bad luck, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So how do you which is an unfortunate perspective, because it actually, I think, uh disincentivizes people from doing the work of actually, you know
Hmm.
acclimating to the sound and getting it wrong in order to get it right eventually. So
Yeah.
what would you say to students like that who are actually now feeling a bit uh I don't know, concerned about getting it wrong and what that means? Like, is
Yeah.
there since there is a vibratory potency to these mantras and a physiological effect in some deep way,
Hmm.
doesn't that mean that if I pronounce it wrong, I'm going to, grow myself a third arm,
Yeah.
so to speak?
um, yeah, I would say you possibly could, you know, you could cause yourself, you could, I haven't managed it yet, but no, you could cause yourself some damage, but only if you are doing a lot of sounding, right? If you're sounding
Yeah.
incorrectly a lot, and I have seen people who have done that and have their whole eyes like covered in styes, heat, I mean, some of these mantras so powerful, when you do it in a group even incorrectly, you get hot, your whole system becomes hot. Like so many really extraordinary things have happened in groups, and most people there are not pronouncing it totally correctly, but always it's kind of a movement of energy, right? It's trying to release things. um if you're not doing 2 hours every day, consistently correctly, and you're just occasionally do it, and the intention is there, and the heart is there, then it still is, going to be a deeply beautiful and powerful experience, and you can trust whatever energetic experiences happen are part of this moving. And it's a beautiful image that Shankara gives in the Isha Upanishad of two pieces of sandalwood. So when you rub two pieces of sandalwood together, it's a very disgusting smell. Apparently, I haven't actually smelt it. Um, and so this is the idea of sugandhim in the Mrityunjaya mantra, the good smell. So it's a very, and this is a image to describe what happens when we come near the Veda or the mantra, right? So when you first come near it, you're coming near this very intense energy, creates a bit of a bad smell. But eventually, as your system comes more into harmony with that Veda, then you get the beautiful smell of the self, of the sandalwood, right? So there are many different
Mm.
extraordinary energetic things that can happen. And I would trust that even getting it right is a lifetime journey anyway, and hitting that perfect sound. If we're there with the right intention, and we're interested, it's more about the attitude. Because if we're like, I'm going to sound this, I've heard it's good to sound it 108 times, so I'm going to do that every day for a month, that could have some untoward energetic effects. But if we're sitting there with like, I'm interested in just kind of hearing like my voice and hearing what the sound of this mantra could be and investigating with it and listening, then that kind of attitude is not going to bring us it can still bring us massive energetic experiences, but they are going to be part of the process of that sandalwood rubbing towards that, and we can trust it.
Yeah, I'm thinking of it's almost like a repetitive strain injury, right? Like if you do something
Yeah,
once or twice, you're not going to get that injury. But if over time, if you do it incorrectly
yeah,
over and over and over, like chaturanga, for example,
yeah,
you're going to, tear your rotator cuff. And it,
exactly.
presumably then, if you are in a place where you're actually so dedicated to a practice of repetition that you would be repeating it for 2 hours every day, you probably also are interested enough in the recitation to learn it correctly and would have sort of discovered that at some point.
Exactly, exactly. And people will email me, if they're doing a course with me and like, oh, I'm having this really strong energies happening. It's just like, okay, just back off the sound a little, just do 5 minutes rather than. So, you do have to be careful. I mean, I absolutely, when I started, I mean, when I started, I was Bikram yoga only, right? And then only Ashtanga. It was like the
Oh,
idea of
interesting.
sitting still was just like crazy. The only thing I could do was sweat hard in a room, right? So I had to do lots of Bikram before I could handle Ashtanga. And then I was doing Ashtanga and Jiva Mukti. Um, and then I signed up for this Krishnamacharya course, and they were doing the yoga that the KYM does. I mean, I had to wake up and do 2.5 hours of like pigeon, the full yoga so that I could handle being in their yoga class because I mean, I was a real absolute mess on many, many levels. I've been through a lot to kind of stabilize myself so that I can
Yeah,
function.
I loved, I hope it's okay to share, but you wrote in your book, so I feel like it's fine, that you went to your first yoga class high on cocaine.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And in Notting Hill, yeah, I went straight there from the club, and something happened in that class. It was like I am never
Not
missing this.
Notting Hill, which studio was it?
It was a small studio, someone called Lisa Boohan, who was a
Okay.
Bikram lady, and then she was kind of like my first. But I didn't know it was Bikram. I didn't
Wow.
know what Bikram was, But and then I did at least 3, 4 more classes like that, and then it just dropped away, right? You can't. The yoga just. It's like I didn't have to give up
Mm-hmm.
anything. The yoga just filled me, and I was like, I just could never miss that class. And within a year, I was in India.
Yeah.
And then eventually, I'm at the point now where even moving my arm, I want to do some yoga. It's like that. I just don't want to do anything but sit still and listen to sound. I mean, my practice is completely changed. I don't know why I even came up with that. It was something you said about. Oh yeah, so when I first started the sounding, I approached it like I approached my yoga, right? It was like I was doing 2 hours a day and I was sounding them written 108 times every day for like, 2 months. And I mean, and I kind of like vibed of just being really, really high energetically, just crazy energy stuff happening. And when I taught, I mean, I was a little, I used to push people like to that level as well. I used to do call and response really fast, and people were like, what, sweaty. I remember some person came to me this was like, I don't know, 15 years ago to it was in a yoga festival, and why did you come here? What brought you to this class? And one man was like, oh, I really wanted to go to the Ashtanga class, but I broke my ankle, so I've been forced to come here. And like, okay. And then by the end of the session, he was dripping with sweat, and he's like, this was so much more intense than an Ashtanga class because I'm doing kind of Shiva chants, call and response really, really fast. And a few people, it was too much for some people. And then compared to how I teach now, which is like sometimes a whole hour, all we'll do is like sound the R, and listen for the R.
Mm.
And that has been a progression of the practice of learning to hear myself and the teachers that I've met that have guided me and allowed my physical nervous system enough capacity to kind of be here, because I was desperately trying not to be here.
Mm. Well, I'm glad you made it here.
I'm almost here, yeah.
So my question about that sort of segues nicely into my question about grammar, just because in terms of the sounding, right? So one thing about what that I've observed also in terms of this, I guess, because I consider myself a student who also sort of came from yoga into Sanskrit, and of course, when I first studied with a teacher more formally, the several other yoga teachers slash students who came into that class fell away very quickly because
Yeah,
of the grammar, because the
yeah,
grammar was so difficult and intimidating,
yeah.
because the grammar's hard. The grammar and the syntax is really hard. So, and what's more accessible for many people, and what many people I think kind of, they're like, oh yeah, I love chanting mantras in class, and I
Yeah.
love Nama Sankirtana, and so I want to go and study Sanskrit more formally, and then they realize, oh wow, this is actually a super complex language, and then they might get pulled into pedantic
Yeah.
grammatical considerations that don't feel
Yeah.
like the spiritual practice to them, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm curious, when you were talking about how we enter into it from these three pillars, right? The vibration, the grammar, and
Mhm.
uh-oh, and the
The
meaning,
rhythm, I said.
the rhythm. Sorry, yes, the chanda.
Yeah. Yeah.
What is that grammar in your view really necessary, or can students kind of still extract the profundity
Mhm.
of Sanskrit from merely vibration or merely a chanting kind of
Mhm.
practice?
Um, yeah. They can. Absolutely, you can. But it adds so much more. I mean,
Yeah.
yes, of course you can, but it's kind of impossible also at the same time. Um, I love teaching grammar, and I don't call it grammar because you hear grammar and you think the English word,
Grammar
it's
school.
Vyakarana, right? Yeah, right. It's Vyakarana. It's grammar is a psychological process. It's refining the mind to be able to
Mm.
see clearly. So the way I teach the Vyakarana, I was very blessed. Dr. Shastri taught me all the paradigms with the sounds of his village. So Rama, 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 He Rama, He Rama, He Rama, Ramam. So we learn all the paradigms with chant. So they're learning. So we have early morning on my grammar course. We'll have early morning chanting sessions where we're just chanting through all of the nouns, all of the verbs, and the panini su out just tabhyam his. So I'm teaching the grammar through sound as well. You can't separate it, right? The whole of the grammar came forward in Panini Sutra, which is all in sound. And I was also blessed for Peter to show me the depth of the Panini Sutra. A sutra, the definition of a sutra is Vishwamukha, Vishwamukha, turning in all faces. So it's universal, right? It's not just applying to the grammar, it's applying to me and you. I am a word, just as you are a word. What happens when we come together to form a sentence that is happening between us? You can't separate grammar from the experience of me as a word moving around in life. So I'm always like it's impossible for me to teach without going into the deep philosophy of every element of it. And I think that's often what my students say, like they kind of okay, they start with the sounding with me, and then they're like, okay, well, I'll learn how to read it, and then before they know it, they're kind of so far along, and they're like, well, I just never knew grammar could be such a deeply psychological, and not just psychological, spiritual process, um, of deepening in how to see clearly, because you can't do the Sanskrit grammar if your mind is not clear, right? You've got to be able to
Hmm.
see, and also the karaka. So I've just finished my chapter, The Cosmos of the Sentence, 10,000 words. It's my longest chapter, but I think it's going to be accessible. It's 1,000
The
words on each of the
cosmos
words
of the sentence. I
of the
love that.
sentence. So in, with, by,
Mm.
for, from. What do they mean, right? What are these six key little words that we use all the time in English? I'm going with the person from here to there. There's only six relationships a word can have with an action. An action's in the center, and you have the six relationships around the edge. This is the center of the cosmos of the Sanskrit cosmology. You cannot understand a single Sanskrit sentence unless you've understood that the action is in the center, and the relationship that each noun has with that center is written into the word itself. It's expressed within the word. It's deeply philosophical. You can't. That's what my whole first grammar course is on. You can't even begin to enter into it unless you understand the deep philosophical foundation of not only every sentence but every word. So I've also written the cosmos of the word, which is shorter. So the dhatu and the pratyaya. What are the two bits that join to make every word? Consciousness and matter. Why am I called the word? The beginning was the word because I'm a joining of consciousness and matter. So prakriti and purusha is in every word, and when we can see this, the beauty, then you can, each word becomes a kind of jewel, a universe. If you don't have the kind of structure to understand how a word comes about, and also the four stages of speech, that every word, physical word that we speak is a product of the subtle dimensions joining in what's called the madhyama realm, and the Panini grammar is all in subtle and causal. It's discussing it's a meta language which discusses how the causal and subtle elements give rise to physical speech. And beneath that, physical, subtle, causal, we have the para, that which is beyond, down where we get the word paranormal, beyond, in our lower belly. What is more magical than how every word comes forth in this moment? Where is it coming from? Can I be aware of the subtle and causal realms that bring forth this word? And this is what's so beautiful. You see, Sanskrit is the easiest language in the world to learn, is how I always express it, because makes so much sense. It's kind of like it's just got this intuitive resonance of, of course that's how it is. And written into every single word is the map of exactly how that word came forth from that which is beyond, through the causal, through the resonance of the vowels and the consonants, through the subtle, and into the physical realm. And of course, when we understand that, when we can hear, I hear the word karma, but karma comes from kura. And what's kura? And what's the vowel r? That's fire. Kura, karma. You're like, it's like taking apart a watch. Vyakarana, the word for grammar in Sanskrit, means fully taking apart the parts, right? So if you don't know anything about watches, you look at a watch, you whatever. If you've taken apart that watch yourself and you know exactly how that watch comes together, you're going to look at the physical forms around us in a very different way. So as we take apart every word and every sentence and we look down to the subtle and causal realms, we come back forth with a new vision, with a new capacity to hear. And it's almost impossible to separate from our deepening of what a mantra is the roots that lie between, if we're talking about mantras like the Gayatri or the Mrityunjaya that have actual words, what are the roots beneath it? How did that come to form? And what is the cosmos of the actual structure of the sentence here? Because we translate it to mean, we pray, we sacrifice to this God. That's not how it is in Sanskrit. In Sanskrit, sacrifice is existing here in the middle, and there is a relative experience between that action and something which has the capacity to act in this particular moment, in this particular way. It completely changes the way we see words, which is what I first felt when I saw Dr. Shastri. It's like, this man understands language in a way that is extraordinary. And slowly now,
I mean, I can
to realize why he could do that.
Yeah, I mean, you can get a taste of sort of the shift in perception just in the way that you described it. And I don't think, I've had a lot of conversations with folks about Sanskrit, and it's something that I'm in sort of a phase of doing more of, people sort of that are more on the, from the vibrational to the scholarly and everywhere in between. And I love the way that you expressed that. So I'm curious. Panini has always felt to me like the driest the driest adventure. I'm like putting it off and putting it off. I haven't formally studied the Ashtadhyayi yet, but listening to you, I'm like, dang, I need to get into that. So I'm curious about how all the things you're talking about connects to the Maheshwara Sutra, because I first saw this text in the kind of a guidebook that my teacher Paul kind of compiled, and he hasn't really ever taught anything about it. It's sort of one of those things that I think at some point he was teaching on, and then it's kind of as he teaches other things, it sort of hasn't been brought up so much. But I found it fascinating, and I immediately was attracted to it, to its kind of cryptic nature. I sensed something so profound just in looking at it, and I was so delighted actually to see you writing about it in your book. And I don't know if you know of this book, but I don't know how legit it is or how grounded the perspective is, but it's called Shiva's Hologram, the Maheshwara Sutra, and it's the only
with my teacher,
thing
Peter.
written that I've. Oh, he
Yeah.
did. Yeah, because it's the only thing that I've seen written
Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
Maheshwara Sutra. I've never
Yeah.
seen it. I haven't seen any literature on it. Maybe you have. But yeah, talk to us a little bit about this, because it feels like such a
Yeah.
fascinating kind of locus of study and reflection.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, this is at the core of the whole soundscape, the whole language. And yes, it's extraordinary, isn't it? How it can be missed almost, when you realize. And I'm actually in my long-term study group. We're on our third term, I think, of study on this. And it's 42 sounds basically, and it can take 10 seconds to sound, 20 seconds to sound. And we're on our third term, and we've got many terms ahead of us on this study. So we've been going into a lot of detail. And so these sounds, I mean, shall I just sound them? So, because people,
Yes, please.
yeah, so I'll just sound them. Because these, yeah, and then I'll talk about them. Okay. Cable. I'll just kind of warm in. Rorik, aeon, ayat, hayavarat, lan, nyamangananam, jabhain, gadadash, jabakadadash, kapachatata, chatato, kapai, shashasar, hal. I'll just do it one more time. It was a little high. Rorik, aeon, ayat, hayavarat, lan, nyamangananam, jabhain, gadadash, jabakadadash, kapachatata, chatato, kapai, shashasar, hal. So these sounds are the sounds that Maheshwara, which is another name for Shiva, so the story, he's got many names in this story, but Shiva, the people were in despair, great despair. They went to find Lord Shiva. Please help. We don't know what to do. Lord Shiva said, I know what the problem is. The problem is that the Lord Apasmara, the Lord of forgetting, has descended upon mankind. I will now dance the dance of creation on Lord Apasmara while simultaneously killing him to allow us to remember who we really are. So he dances the cosmic dance of creation. And at the end of the cosmic dance of creation, there's a moment of silence. And then he brings his Damaru drum and he hits the Damaru drum 14 times. And each time he hits it, hit Ayun, Rorik, Ayun. And these sounds present at this whole experience were Panini and Patanjali, and out of these sounds they went on to create to create the entire system of Sanskrit, of the Sanskrit language, which is called the Ashtadhyayi, which means 8 meditations. So we think, the famous grammar book of Sanskrit is called 8 Meditations. That's the title. 8 meditations on what? 8 meditations on the 42 sounds that came out of Shiva's drum. So these sounds, the meditation, this great sage Panini, who is not a sage out there, this story is not talking about something that happened 2,000 years ago. This is talking about right now in us. There is that part of us that is in despair. Where do I find the way? And we find Shiva, that which lies within. So Shiva within us is that which lies within everything. And we listen. What is the way? And as we listen, the demon of apasmara is destroyed, and out comes forth the sounds of ah to ha. So the first sound of these sounds is ah, ayun, and the final sound is ha. Aha. What is the word for I in Sanskrit? Aham. Aham. Who am I? Aham. I am ayun, I am these sounds. All of these sounds are who I am. And each of these sounds is related to a different element, or not related to, is an expression in the most subtle form of a different element, of a different movement within our system. And so by hearing these, this is kind of like the most connected, the most kind of raw connection to the sound of the self is in these sounds that came from Shiva's drum. And the whole of the language is a meditation on those sounds. That's at the core of the whole language. I mean, what's more exciting than that? Like, we think Panini, and what does Panini mean? It comes from the root pan, which is got 2 meanings, which means in praising and communicating. So what is the essence of Panini? It's that which wants to communicate. We need to tell someone, I'm hungry, can I have some food? And also it's to praise the wonder of the world around us. That is that if we can't communicate, if we can't praise, we have nothing. We need language, we need the capacity to speak truthfully in connection with our subtle and physical and causal realms. And we all know what it feels like to not say what we need to say, to have said the wrong thing, to have masked ourselves because we have a perception of what is required in this moment and what's acceptable. So we kind of monitor ourselves and don't speak, and then afterwards nearly all of our issues come from not a direct, clear communication of our deepest being. And what does Panini give us? The study of Panini gives us the steps back into ourself, directly into aham, directly into Shiva, I. And when we're rooted in I, the blocks that are going to stop us from truly bringing forth who I am can be let go of, can be dissolved. And then what is more powerful than someone, not that it's about power, but I'm just thinking of the Sankalpa, bringing the Mother of the Gods chapter, my partner, he smashed up the Shell building in London, and he didn't, but a few of the people he was with, he actually sat on the top of the Shell building for a night. Anyway, he got taken to criminal court. It was part of the XR thing, and all 6 of them got found not guilty, primarily because of what Sid found. What he found was that he believed that the people of Shell would have given him permission if they knew what the result of their work was. And he stood in that courtroom, and because he had worked so hard to find what he actually truly believed, and that action aligned entirely with the truth of that feeling, and he was able to bring that truth forward in his words, the whole courtroom was brought to tears, didn't like shock. The prosecutor literally didn't know what to say. All she could say was, "You're lying." And he didn't have to say anything because he had found that connection that allowed the truth of his self to come forward. And it was so powerful that, as someone there said he was almost like it moved mountains. You know, that's how powerful the word is when we truly step into it. And this is a path. The path of Parnani is a path to finding that within ourselves. We don't all have to go smash up the shell building, but to be able to step into who we are and what it is for us to do, and to not hear what everyone else is saying, is a revolutionary act, actually.
That's so beautiful. And it kind of, I'm glad we're sort of moving into this somewhat a direction that kind of lands us in the moment that we're in as we get close to the end of our interview. And and so I kind of wanted to just ask you more directly about this idea of praise as being sort of, you know, one of the powers of language, you know, from a Paninian perspective, but also perhaps, you know, from a cosmic perspective. I'm curious if you think that some of the challenges that we're facing socially, politically, globally, in some sense boils down to a lack of access to this capacity to praise. Can you speak a little bit about that and how you see that as connected to, you know, just some of the symptoms of the Kali Yuga?
Oh gosh. I mean, my mind is spinning a little. So are we going Palestine, Israel, or we just general, or
maybe
yes.
Oh gosh, I wasn't necessarily thinking Palestine, Israel.
Okay. It's just you said
I guess,
challenging.
I
My
mean,
mind.
it's one of those kind of hot button topics. I don't even know where to
Yeah.
begin with that one without inflaming,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, one community or another.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess maybe a way of getting into that would be speaking of the tendency towards tribalistic mentalities in general,
Mm-hmm.
populism, and kind of this sort of this this hardening into opposing camps, and
Mm-hmm.
a loss of, at least this is how I'm seeing it, a loss of kind of a lens, or a rather a language for, to bring it to the topic of our conversation, or a conceptual vocabulary that allows us to speak to or from our interconnectedness, our
Mm-hmm.
shared ground of
Yeah.
being.
Yeah.
That all seems to be missing. So I'm just curious what
Yeah.
all of what we've been talking about has to do with that.
Yeah. So I mean that is written into the structure of Sanskrit. It's like impossible to lose us, you know, our connection with that almost. If you're connecting with Sanskrit and you're being shown, you can connect with Sanskrit and not look at those deeper elements as well. But you know, it's all there. And yes, I feel absolutely. I think probably in essence, it is the lack of listening, the lack of hearing what is being uttered all around, and the need to be the one who is uttering, to state, you know, what am I stating forth, just for the sake of stating forth, rather than a hearing in kind of collaboration, in a hearing to what the moment is calling forth. You know, Peter would always say, what does the moment require? And then we're in service, kaivalyam, you know, the actual goal, if there is a goal of yoga. You know, so many people have never heard of this word kaivalyam. Everyone says, you know, if anyone knows anything, they'll say it's samadhi, the 8th step. And it's like, well, what about 9? There's never 8, it's always 9. And the 4th chapter, no one ever gets to the 4th chapter of the Yoga Sutra. They stop at chapter 2, right? And then chapter 4 is kaivalyam. And what is kaivalyam? Kaivalyam comes from the root cave, which means sevane, in serving, and keva as a whole means an aloneness. So kaivalyam is kind of an alone serving to the whole, the one serving itself. Can we hear that? Can we notice there's many different layers of becoming, of being that service of what is required, no matter what our ego says we think that we should be doing. But on a kind of first step, it's just that keeping that question alive within us. What does the moment require, rather than what do I require? And of course, there's a time and a place for asking what do I require, especially when you spend your whole life not doing that. So each teaching, this is the importance sometimes of a teacher, you know, asking the right question for the right person at the right time, and not presuming that that question, you know, as we so often do now, means that the opposite question is wrong, right? Really hearing, okay, that the opposite question may be relevant sometimes, but bringing in that kind of greater context of the sentence. We're not just the word. Let me just read, if I can, this paragraph. This is in Hatha Yoga, from Exile to Wholeness. I just saw this before I started. Occasionally, like the verb of the sentence required after a string of nouns, we must sacrifice ourselves as the necessary word to give a desired sense of meaning to the whole. We read a sentence one word at a time, but the imprint of what is to come resounds at the beginning, and the beginning echoes at the end. The impact of any word runs like a river back and forth throughout the sentence. As we listen or read, we trust the processes at work as the relational capacity of hatha runs through the sentence, much as it does through life, creating a cohesive meaning of the whole. So I think we can quite easily become an isolated word. It's all about me and myself and and just become the most amazing person of you that you can, which has a shelf life, because it's not who we are. Why does it have a shelf life? Not because it's wrong, or but because the fullness of who we are is not held within that view, within that mentality, within that looking within that lens. There is a deeper lens asking for us to be stepped into, and life will pull us there. And if you have time, unless you have another question, I could read the last few paragraphs of the Hatha Yoga. I think thoughts for that too. Shall I read that? Okay.
Yeah.
It's actually 4 paragraphs, long paragraphs. You can always cut it out. Shall I just read it and you can see what
We'll make it. We'll make it.
Okay. The gravitational force of Hatha swells ruthlessly from life's core, calling us to become the living force of the death that awaits us. It calls us to step out of the paradigm of better or worse, to trust the force of its energy and allow life to become conscious of itself. And so I finally surrendered to its call and stepped wholeheartedly into the life before me. The first shloka of the seminal work on Hatha Yoga, the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, tells us that Hatha Yoga shines before us as a staircase rising to the heights of Raja Yoga, the teaching of the Yoga Sutra. And so the Yoga Sutra starts where Hatha Yoga leaves us, threading the knowing of reality itself into the substance of the continuous unfolding of our life. The staircase of Hatha Yoga is laid before us by the unconscious current of our life. Our agency belongs in whether we choose to step consciously onto the ladder or not. It was the pain of the present which carried the weight of my previous suffering that gave me the strength to step onto my ladder. And as I did, I turned to face the perpetrators of this difficulty and embrace them parts of my dance. Without diminishing their wrongs, I thanked them and reclaimed both the victim and the perpetrator, male and female, you and me. And as I answered the call of 2 in its depths, I found 1. And so are born the qualities of Swatmarama, who is attributed to composing the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, and whose name means rejoicing games with our own consciousness. And our constant revelation of bountiful gifts, a never-ending staircase of revelation. Each stage is a gift to behold and enter fully onto. Each step is uniquely ours to reclaim, and in our reclamation we find the kernel of our existence, the Shiva and Shakti, the Hut and the Ta, the sun and the moon, waiting with open arms to embrace us into their whole. The final paragraph. And the Rishi within, the knower within us, has always known this wisdom, and once found the sound of its resonance. Feeling the gentle rush of air through our throat, the ha remembers me as our tongue rings the roof of our mouth like a beater meeting its drum. An ignition of air rising from our belly as the ta remembers you in our shared showering of resonance. And so ha-ta remembers itself as the emptiness in which the resolution sings, the unmoving journey of exile to wholeness.
Wow, that was beautiful. I had to close my eyes just to take it in. What is this? What's this book? What was the title again?
So the book is The Sounds of Sanskrit, the Language of Yoga. And I've been writing it for 7 years. It is.
Oh, this is your book that you just read from.
Yeah, that's my book.
I didn't get that section, Lucy.
No, I didn't send that to you. Well, there's at least 90,000 words you haven't got, so.
Oh, yeah. No, I thought, I was like, okay, last few chapters are just bullet points. I was like, okay, I didn't get the full bit, but that is a great note to end on. I thought you were reading.
You got like 2% of the book.
Yes, well, I was okay with it. I mean, it was so beautiful, and I'm so excited for you to publish it. But I was also grateful because whenever I have to read a full book, it's always a challenge to read it all. But it was really beautiful, and like being able to have this conversation with you and hear the kind of the aliveness that this is, how this lives within you is really powerful, and I feel like I've received a transmission just having this conversation, and so I'm really excited to share this episode, and wanted to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about where people can find you, what you're kind of offering, online, and how people can get in touch with you if they want to study with you.
Well, first of all, if anyone wants to publish my book, I have not done anything to try and find a publisher because I've been writing it for 7 years. So I'm just lifting my head out of the parapet for that. So if anyone knows who might, preferably Sounds True, if anyone from Sounds True happens to be listening, that's who I want to publish with. So we'll see, or anyone else. Let's see. I haven't really looked into the publishing world yet. And then starting with me, well, it is hard because once people do something with me, they tend to stay around. And so now I'm quite full with all of my long-term groups. If you already know grammar, to join in with some of my grammar groups and my Laghu, then email me. My email's on the website. I'm on very rarely post on Instagram, but I do check messages there. So that might be the easiest. Original Wisdom __. The 2 underscores. Originalwisdom.co.uk is my website. Originalwisdom.com is an American animal website. So mine's .co.uk. But I will be doing, I think, a chakra workshop on the 24th of February, like a 3-hour or 4-hour workshop on how to sound the chakra sounds. And I might do a follow-up on that in March. And then the sounds, my intro course is The Sounds of Sanskrit, the Language of Yoga, which is 4 full Saturdays. And that's kind of like my intro thing. I don't know when I'm going to run that again. So if you're interested, go to the website and say, click on the I'm interested so we can get your name. And then when I do run it again, we'll let you know. But I'm just in a phase of trying to work out how to, I think once the book comes out, things might change quite a lot. So my emphasis at the moment is kind of doing the odd workshops, sticking with my students, and then just trying to get this book out there because that's been, a huge thing. If you were particularly interested, I do offer some early morning meditations, which you might be able to join. So if you're interested in that, it's not on my website, just email me. Yeah.
Lovely. So, Lucy, it's been an absolute pleasure and delight to speak with you. And I've been speaking with Lucy Crisfield. You can find out more about her at the website. Again, remind me, Lucy, this name of the website.
Original Wisdom.
Originalwisdom.co.uk. and The Sounds of Sanskrit, the Language of Yoga is her incredibly lovely book that will be being published hopefully soon. Those of
Yes.
you acquisition editors out there listening to this podcast, and I know there are a few, please reach out to Lucy. Thank you, Lucy. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you.